So welcome, thanks for coming. Session title here is Stop Talking Desktop Transformation and Start Talking Use Cases. I'm Shawn and
I am Pierre Marmignon.
And Pierre and I talked about doing this session because we were sort of fed up with Citrix's marketing of desktop transformation and how you should take your entire environment and put it into this gadget and crank the wheel and output this desktop model that's going to fit every single use case. Because Pierre and I spend our lives as consultants advising customers how to appropriately place users into the right use case for what they need. And so we decided that it was a good opportunity to sort of discuss this topic. So, any comments?
I would say on all projects I have done, I've never talked about desktop transformation. The customer wants to do desktop transformation or desktop virtualization because they have listened to some marketing messages or so on, but at the end of the day, I've never done this. I've always focused on users and on delivering them the best user experience. So we agreed with Shawn on talking about what we are doing and why we are not doing what the vendors expect us to do.
Yeah, our jobs is not to do technology for technology's sake, but to give the people what they need to get their job done. So, really quickly, our Twitter handles are up here, and don't forget the BriForum hashtag if you'd like to tweet about it. Quick introduction about myself. I'm Shawn, as I said. I'm a consultant based in the Chicago area. I primarily do consulting for Fortune 500 organizations, financial services, insurance, that type of market. And I also do a training class on Zen App and Zen Desktop. That's a completely independent curriculum that I developed, originally developed by Brian Madden and then taken over by myself and Dr. Benny Trich in like 2008 timeframe. So Benny and I continue to deliver that training class. So if you're interested in that, please go to my website. And Pierre?
I've been a Citrix consultant for 12 years now, mainly working with largest French enterprises because, yes, I'm French. So please excuse my English because sometimes it's not that easy for me to speak in a foreign language. And I have been specialized in designing large-scale architectures and also automating all deployments, configuration, and administration tasks. I'm running citrixtools.net, if you know the website. And I also created my company to provide softwares around desktop management and virtual environment management.
Cover the agenda? So, yeah, there you go.
So, what does the next generation desktop look like? Is it virtual? Is it physical? Is it hosted or not? We will discuss about it. Then, what's the definition of success? Because if you want a project to work, you want user acceptance and you want to be successful. So you need to focus on what will make your project successful. Then what's wrong with desktop transformation? Why can't you or can you virtualize the desktop? What should we do there? That's the main idea, the main discussion, and a little summary at the end.
And we want to keep this conversation open. We have plenty of material to talk through the 75 minutes, but if there are questions or if anyone disagrees with what we're saying, feel free to make comments, raise your hand, and we'll discuss. And maybe you guys can convince us that we're wrong.
Yes.
I'm always open to other ideas. I don't have all the answers, so I'm open to any kind of thoughts or conversations that you guys have to help share with others.
That's the main idea, sharing experiences.
Yeah.
So what's the next generation desktop? Is it a physical desktop? Maybe. Actually, vendors are saying it's a virtual one, but it could be a physical desktop. Is it RDS Zen App? Is it VDI? Is it a tablet, a mobile device, or a web device, web client? Actually, in our view, it's whatever allows the user to work properly and efficiently in a more flexible way, but while still meeting business requirements, because it's all about allowing people to do their work properly. And it's not only about IT things, it's really delivering the best user experience for them to do the job, because at the end of the day, the users are making the money. The users are making the company growing, and gathering new customers. So we need really to focus on the users and not to focus on the devices. And we need to have, for example, the right device for the right users. That's the main topic of our vision of the next generation desktop.
Yeah, and it's odd how often people don't understand this. I've spoken with a client of mine recently that the CTO wants to do VDI for 8,000 of the Chicago users. Now, we've done a very successful VDI implementation for about 4,000 remote workers in India, and it's been working out well. Now that we look at the Chicago use case, it's a much broader set of applications and a much broader set of use case needs, as Pierre mentions. And what I was saying is I find it's amazing how many people don't get the concepts that we're talking about, because they keep saying that, well, we could use VDI for low complexity use cases. Like, let's take all the managers, all the senior level managers and executives that are just, they use, Office, and these guys use Lotus Notes, so unfortunately they use Lotus Notes and a few other things. So they're a very simple use case. We'll put them on VDI. And I was like, yeah, except those executives are the people that are traveling like 60% of their time. So if we give them a virtual desktop, then they can't work on the airplane, they can't work when they're not near Wi-Fi, and they'll have to have 3G, 4G. So I said, that's not really a good fit for those people. But I've had that same conversation 30 times in the last year. Why don't we put our executives on VDI because they're a simple use case? And I go, well, because you can't. I mean, you could, but it would be a very poor experience.
And actually, working with large virtualized desktop project, I ended up to have, let's say, 80% of users on XenApp and 20% of the users on other kind of desktops. It was mainly FAT, and VDI was only for specific targeted users. And that's something we'll discuss about, because Citrix has a nice view on it because they're providing the whole solution with one license. But you really need to focus on what they need and how to help them achieve their goals, because you can't think of the new desktop like IT only. You also need to think about users, what they do need. And if you don't do this, you will just have a nice VDI project that will never be deployed. And that's it. That's what I've seen. I've seen some projects just canceled because it was not meeting the business requirements. And nowadays, business is deciding. IT has to think about providing the right service, not providing a solution that user will have to accept. That's not working now. That was working some years ago, but that's not working now. And that's also why we will talk about the success of a project. Success. You have two kinds of success. You have success for IT. What are the success for IT? Basically, it's lowering costs, ease deployments. It's like remove masters or lessen the number of masters, because I've seen some big customers with something like 120 different kinds of masters. So they're seeing the VDI or virtually new desktop project. Our goal is just to lower master and provide desktop more efficiently and not to have to wait for weeks, for example, to get the new desktop. And simple management. That's a true story, but actually vendors are not really powerful on delivering solutions with
the simple management actually does tie in quite a bit to your reduced operational support costs as well.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that in the image management model later, that the more image management models you have, the more your operational expense is, which ultimately, even if you're trying to drive your CapEx costs down and your OpEx costs are increasing, the net result is you're still spending more money. So.
Yes. And the problem we do both see talking with customers is the virtual desktop projects are often pushed by IT just to meet lowering cost, reduce operational cost, and ease management. But these projects are really expensive. It's really expensive to redesign a new generation desktop. And IT does not have the budget, the money anymore. Because now business has the budget. They can buy SAP or something, Oracle applications that cost millions of dollars or pounds. And IT does not have the power or the money to buy such applications, for example. So if you want to sell something, if you want to sell a new generation desktop project, you need to onboard users and business for them to finance the project. And if you see it just as an IT project, it will fail. That's what I've seen, shown also. And for example, building a new generation desktop, it could be adding also single sign-on. From what I've seen with big retail customer, for example, the fact that you add a single sign-on, an easy logon for the users, it's more important than getting a new desktop. Because if you are in user shoes, and we'll talk about this also later, if you are in user shoes, you don't want to move from desktop to desktop in a store or something, and having to log on every desktop. You just need the single sign-on. And I've been doing a 28,000 virtual desktop project, and we were using single sign-on, and we sold it as a whole solution. It was the package. The new desktop is an agile desktop, and it will roam from desktop to desktop, internal mobility. And we are still currently deploying it, and the business guys came to us and said, we really love the single sign-on. Could you deploy the single sign-on first? Because we want the single sign-on. And we can wait for the virtual desktop, but the single sign-on, it's so nice. So we really need to focus on this, because even they want it to be easy, to be high performance. Just take an example. You are selling in a shop, okay, or in a store. You are selling. You are in front of the customer. You can be this customer. Every one of you can be this customer. You go to the guy and you have to ask a question. Is it available? How much does this cost? Do you want to wait something like 3, 5, 4, 10 minutes for the guy to give you the information? With all people queuing behind you, waiting for other kind of information? No. Just want to go to the desktop, open it fast, get your application, and have the answer, let's say, in real time.
So question on that. How many people in this room have been at a retail clerk who said, sorry, my system just locked up or crashed or hung? Does that happen? Okay. So this is a real problem. And I just had this happen to me like 2 weeks ago. I was at a store to buy something, and the person said, oh, I'm sorry, my machine locked up. And I was like, you should talk to somebody about that.
Yes. I had a call from my phone provider, and I wanted to change some options on my line, and said, I'm sorry, the computer is so slow, I can't do it. So let's call later. But it's really a bad experience for the users, but also for the customers. So that's a good example of IT not helping business to get more customers or to satisfy customers. And if you can prove to the business that IT is able to help them, then you won't have any money problem. So you will be able to do your project. And also, you will design the appropriate solution.
Yeah. And the reason why that we specifically called out perceived performance here is because when you talk to an IT person about performance, we think of, percent memory consumption, disk access latency times, what's the CPU level, what's all these things. And the end user does not care about any of that. All they care about is they click a button and the result comes back in 1/10 of a second. And most of the times, IT people are not geared towards that kind of line of thinking. We think of performance as being, measured statistical information. And I'll give you an example of this where it happened at a customer of mine. They wanted to virtualize Office with AppV. They were pushing the AppV agenda very hard. We're going to virtualize all of our applications. And I spent a lot of time educating them about the complexity of virtualizing Office with AppV or any other app virtualization technology. I said this is a bad idea. There's integration challenges. There's shell context integration challenges. It's a bad approach. And they ignored my advice, moved forward with the project to roll out virtualized Office. And what killed it for them is the traders got a hold of the virtualized Office, and they benchmarked how much time it took them to get into Excel with the physical install from the old version, which was 1/10 of a second, and the new virtualized one that was about 4/10 of a second, and they said, this is unacceptable. Question in the back. Yes. So, and the key thing that I try to advise people about with application virtualization is you have to keep something in mind, and that is the number of times that a person is in and out of an application, okay? If this is some app they open up, like it's a healthcare application where they open it up and the app stays running the entire 8-hour shift and they're just logging in and out of the app, Those types of things are not going to be as noticeable to the end user than the application launch time of an Office application where they're in and out of Word and Excel and PowerPoint, maybe 50 times or 100 times a day. That quarter of a second or half of a second delay really becomes noticeable. And as I said, for the traders, it was literally, time is money kind of a problem. So that then killed the project. So perceived performance is really key.
Yes, I have an example about this. I've always been doing my projects, using a Citrix policy to limit bandwidth for every deployment and to limit bandwidth to a specific limit that was not impacting the perceived performance. But I started to do this because I was deploying a customer, and the customer was deploying all over Europe, and we did not have any limit before, and we started to deploy new countries. And the new countries were also onboarding new salespeople. And once they called us and they said, hey, since I have new guys in my team, it's slower. And actually, it was not. It was very good, but from a perceived performance point of view, it was excellent. Then it switched to really good. And really good is enough to work, but you get used to the best. So when you get used to the best, then you notice when it's a little bit slower. Even if you knew or had only the very good, it would be enough. So now what I'm doing is I am always limiting the bandwidth so that even the first users, the user experience is consistent. It's very good. It's not excellent sometimes because of bandwidth network constraints, but from a user point of view, it's always the same experience. And that's really funny because I learned it with users complaining, and we went on site, so that's perfect. Yes, but it was better before. So they notice that kind of thing. It's really important to think about all these kinds of stuff if you want your users to be happy and not to call support because it was excellent, it's just very good, but it was excellent, so I want it to be excellent.
Yeah, and I've actually found with a lot of my larger clients, I'm amazed that I walk into an enterprise client with 20,000 users, 100 to 150 branch sites, and I say, what QoS policies do you have in place on your network to control different ports, different protocols, whatever? Oh, we don't use QoS. I'm like, what? Like how could you not have QoS? I've got QoS in like small business clients of mine to prioritize VoIP and Citrix traffic and that kind of stuff, and they're like, well, how can we determine what traffic is more important than the other? And I'm like, this is not a rhetorical question. I mean, there's real-time protocols, and then there's the I don't care when it gets here protocols. And he said, well, you got to understand, we've got some apps that send critical information via like SMTP or FTP. And I was like, then you should kill that developer because there's absolutely no reason you should be transmitting information you're relying on delivery over SMTP. It's not guaranteed delivery. So anyway.
So they also want IT to be responsive. So they just want it to be a service. But I think like every one of us, when you buy a Dropbox or Moze or something like this, you buy a service, you pay for this service, you just want it to work. It's not your problem if it's not working. You want just them to fix it. I am using an hosted exchange, and when it's not working, I'm just like crazy. I need my mails. And I just want them to fix it. They told me 2 or 3 months ago, we are sorry, it was the latest Microsoft patch, it broke Exchange, and so you can do this and this and this as a workaround. I say, will you refund me? Will you refund me for the 2 days of downtime? They said, no. Okay, I was an unhappy customer, and we have to see enterprises and IT in enterprises as that kind of providers. Otherwise, IT will disappear and everyone will go to the cloud, where you can talk about service, you can talk about delivering things fast. And IT, in my view, has to adapt and to forget about, I will build this desktop, I am the almighty IT, and you as a user just take this desktop. That's not working anymore. And some companies are still doing it, by the way, but I think it's the wrong view. I was talking with a large customer, something like 20,000 desktops, just 2 days ago, just the day before I came here, and said, we want to virtualize desktops. Okay, what do you want to do? we want to have less work, okay? So IT wants to have less work. We just want to manage them easily. And what about the users? We don't care about the users. That's for us, okay? And how will you do? We will do a pilot. We will say to all business, we have this kind of technology available for a specific cost, okay? And we will wait for them to onboard the solution. Say, okay, and then we don't know if they don't onboard, they don't onboard. I said, come on, you need to talk with them to grab their expectations. Oh, yes, but that's not the point of the project, okay? And I said, you can do what you want. You want my team to work with you in the study, but if you are looking only at IT, never at users, your project will fail, and you will never deploy your new desktop. Yeah. And for me, that's clear. We need to think about.
And along those lines, too, I always try to advise people that are talking about desktop virtualization that if you're looking at your user classifications within your organization, almost every vendor out there tries to talk you into sort of hand-picking users that are simple, task workers and do the pilot and get the success on your project and expand your scope and that kind of stuff. And there's two fatal flaws with that approach. I always recommend people take their most difficult use cases and pilot them first. And the reason for that is if you succeed at the difficult users, you will easily succeed at the simple users, but it's not true the other way around. You might succeed with the original users, your IT executives are saying, this is great, scale it up, and you find yourself just entrenched in complexity as you start getting to the more difficult use cases. The second reason is you start out simple, you're going to have a very low resource profile for those users. So when you start trying to estimate your SAN requirements and your server infrastructure requirements, you're going to lowball that estimate. And when your boss then says, scale this up to 1,000 or 10,000 users, you haven't properly assessed the resource footprint of those other categories of users, and you're then going to have to go back and say, we need 200,000 more budget to allocate this hardware because we didn't adequately assess the needs.
Yes.
So
that's what I had on the big projects some months ago, yeah. And I had to make an audit, and I said, okay, you need a new SAN, but a big one. So it was 1.5 million euros, and you also need more servers because you will have something like 15,000 concurrent users on the 40 VMs you expected. It won't really work, and just because they were just looking at the average consumption. They are working 8 hours a day. They looked at 24 hours average, and they are just talking about average metrics, and they never talk about the repartition of and peaks of the consumption. And what I just did is I took the peaks. I do an average of the peaks and not a simple average, and on 8 hours. And they were saying, yes, it's working, but you only have 100 users. In 1 year, you will have 15,000, and you need to adapt. And that's really, they never came, users were not complaining, the pilot users, although they know they were pilot users, were not complaining, but they had 3 minutes logon times. They had very bad user experience, and they were not calling support. So they are not calling support, it's okay. I said, let's go to see the users in their day-to-day tasks. And we just spent 1 day with the users talking with customers using IT. And we said, but are you accepting this? No, it's like that, but no. What would you want us to do? It was better before on our old 7-year-old fat PC, so we would expect the new desktop to be at least better than the previous one. If you don't do this, you can also have users trying to avoid your new solution. Just Brian is talking a lot about consumerization. If the users are pissed, they will try to find new way not to use your new solution. And that's what's happening in some cases.
So last vote, we didn't talk the mobility scenario, flexible work styles.
Yes.
So I don't know how many people in this room, just a quick show of hands, how many people are being forced into figuring out mobility strategy around tablets, mobile devices, that kind of stuff. So this is obviously a big trend, and I'm seeing this even in clients that I didn't anticipate seeing it right away, like financial services. I thought that was going to be like the last adopter besides maybe government, military. But the financial services people, especially the people working on the investment side, really want to have a mobile tablet with all the customer information on it delivered in a secure manner. And some of these are web apps, which makes it easy. You can just do like a Juno S Pulse client and go back to the data center and use your web applications. Some of them are not exactly web applications, but web-delivered applications. So we really need to remote that off of a terminal server or a virtual desktop. And they're requiring it. This is part of the way that they bring, I don't want to say bring in clients, but impress the clients that they have. Because within their line of business, they are competing against other investment firms, and those firms have this facility, and therefore my client says, we have to have this facility. We don't care how much it costs, we need it. And so I'm being driven to do a lot of work around mobility, and it's one of these things, you know, it's what's the best use case scenario? Do they remote back to a virtual desktop and try to poke their fingers around a Win7 desktop, or are we going to deliver certain applications via XenApp, and then does the XenApp work with all the applications they need to use? And so it becomes the same use case analysis all over again, just for the use case of bringing an iPad in front of a client.
Yes, and also other applications suited for the tablets, for example. Because if you are using something like a mainframe emulator, is it suitable to be used even through XenApp on the tablet? That's also really important because I've seen some project in healthcare. It's about something like 10,000 iPads, and the doctors and nurses just took the iPad and brings them back to IT, saying the application is not usable. And it was not a problem of the architecture. It was a problem of the application development. How many of you have seen a Windows application that is really usable on a tablet? You can do things, but if it's your day-to-day work, you can't lose 5 or 10 minutes trying to type something with autocorrection that is failing, or you don't have the menu, the native experience. That's all about native experience. And Citrix is helping with the mobility SDK, but apart for some application, I've never seen any business applications using that kind of new development because it's really expensive to modify the application. But IT will have also to adapt for these new use cases. So the idea is there is that we need, when you are working in a next generation desktop project, let's call this a next generation desktop project, we need to know that IT has some goals, but users also are expecting lots of new things. Moreover, when you are replacing the 7 or 8 years old desktop that is not working that well with the new application. And the first thing is that IT need to live a day in users' shoes. I am working with big retail companies in France, and these companies are doing really interesting things. When you are working for IT, if you are an engineer, you have to work for 3 months in the shops or in the restaurants, doing all a basic user can do. So if it's making fries, you have to make fries for 1 week, even if you are an IT guy. If you are an IT manager, it's 6 months. Why? Just for IT guys to understand what is the real life of their users. And even if 3 months or 6 months, it's really long, okay? And you don't want to cook fries or something for 6 months when you are working in IT. But these IT guys, they are just thinking differently because they are just thinking about the guys that make fries. How can I help him to do his job with IT? And I think that's the key. That's the key. We need to think like this, and we need to drive our projects like this. I just finished with my team a very huge migration. That's for a customer that is selling tires and mounting tires. And at the end of the project, the business guy called us because the guy that were changing the tires, they noticed that the IT was better. And they just called to say, hey, it's so huge. It's just helping us. We don't have to wait for 3 minutes login time when you are in front of the customer. And when the guy that has nothing to do about IT calls to say, I have the service I needed, I think your project is successful. And that's the only way your project can be successful. So we need to help IT as consultant. We need to help IT to see project from a user perspective. Really, it's helping to spend some days, not months, but some days working with the users to see how they are working with IT, what are their expectations, and providing them, for example, self-service tools. Sometimes they just need to be able to quickly change the default printer. Admin can specify a default printer, but they want another one. It's just helping them, and they can't change the printer. They just want it to be remembered. That's an example of a self-service application. How many of you have worked in some cases when support was called stating that the application was not there because there were no shortcuts on the desktop? Is it something that you really experimented? That's something I experimented. And also, that's the same at home. My wife has nothing to do with IT. She called me, hey, we don't have Office on the computer. We do have Office on the computer. Yes, but I can't find it. And I just created a shortcut on the desktop, and it was there. So we have to see through users' eyes just to give them the right service.
And I have a situation like that with a customer where about 3 or 4 years ago, they'd implemented a pandemic planning plan. So if the bird flu hit and people were not able to actually arrive in the office because of fear of getting the virus, that they could work from home. So the one brilliant thing this company did as part of that strategy was, even though the pandemic bird flu didn't actually really hit, they continued a work from home program where each person that was able to work from home has to do it at least 1 or 2 days per month, including the IT people, which typically the IT people are like, well, I got my laptop, this and that, whatever, but the IT people go home, they use a virtual desktop, or they RDP into a physical desktop in the office, and they have to work for an 8-hour day or 2 8-hour days a month just so that they understand how productive you can be completely remote, using voice over IP and using all the facilities you'd have to use through, when you're detached from your real office.
I think a lot of people here are going through that same thing with the Olympics.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, we just had the NATO Summit in Chicago, and leading up to the NATO Summit, we went from about 300 to 500 average VPN users per day per concentrator up to about 1,600 per concentrator. So we had over 6,000 total users coming through VPN. And it was interesting because these brand new Juniper mags were put in about 6 months ago to handle the load that the previous generation devices weren't handling. And something that was sort of not configured properly and wasn't noticed until we hit 6,000 users was that the VPNs that were put in didn't have SSL offload enabled. So as soon as we hit Friday, when there were a majority of the people that were working from home, people were getting, like I noticed it immediately around 8 a.m. I was like, hey, I'm noticing my RDP latency. I've got about a half a second keystroke delay. Something's up. Let's start looking into this. We went to the Juniper devices. We're looking at the CPU load. We checked a couple of things, and we decided to engage Juniper on it because nothing from the web management page was giving any indication the devices were choking, and they have capacity for 10,000 SSL sessions. So like, this is not right. And when we actually got into the CLI, we noticed that the SSL offload was disabled. And we're talking to Juniper, and the Juniper guy says, oh, no, that's not required. It'll be fine without it. You can scale well beyond that. And I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we need to turn on SSL. Once we turned on SSL and bounced the devices, they've been humming along just fine with several thousand users each. So.
Yes. So, you want to talk about?
Yeah, so embracing user expectations on new compute models, tablets, and mobile, and these kinds of things. This is really, I think of this as like a journey, really, because the people that are requesting iPads expect an iPad-like native experience or an Android tablet native experience. And IT realizes that that's just not practical. But rather than saying, no, you can't have that, or you can't do that, or you have to use it in this mode, you have to use a Zen app or Zen desktop remoting display protocol, is not exactly what the end user wants. So what I'm trying to find ways to do is say, okay, if what you really want to do is get access to some of your documents, some of your email, some of your web applications, maybe we'll provide a hybrid approach where you can use your web applications through a reverse proxy, SSL, to the web applications. We'll give you some documents in a secure file sharing solution. We'll give you some secure email through Sandbox Good. We'll combine these things together to give you guys the solution that you want with a native-like experience, but still meeting what IT desires, which is secure ability that they don't have to worry about the data because it's encrypted on the endpoint and these kinds of things. Because the reality is, Citrix has had a technology called Project Golden Gate and Project Alcatraz that's sort of a secure mobile email that was supposed to be like an alternative to good technology, but it works over display remoting. It's XenApp or Zen Desktop, primarily XenApp, remoting an email client down to a phone. And the reality is, mobile networks, 4G is not so bad, but 3G mobile networks, you can have latency anywhere from 100 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds, depending on where you are and if you're experiencing packet loss and these kinds of things. So display remoting, it works. It does work okay. But if I had a choice, I would never choose display remoted email over a native email client, sandboxed or not. So I think we have to keep putting ourselves into the perspective of the user. What would I want to use if I had that device? Would I really want to use display remoting? And if you say, I love display remoting, I'm going to use XenApp on my mobile device all day long, I challenge you, get on a train that's going 60 miles, whatever that is, 80 kilometers, 90 kilometers an hour. Get on a train and try to use that mobile email and see how satisfied you are with that. It's not a good experience. So,
yes, we have talked a lot about external mobility, but you can also have internal mobility. And that's where tablets and remote display protocols may help. For example, being in an hospital, having an iPad and walking, or in all the hospital or rooms to see patients, or in stores, you just are a seller and you have your iPad, you can talk with the customers, and that's where it's a real tool, because it's better to be with the customers. The tablets have something that is convenient. You have to be close, so you can create a relationship just to show your tablet, just to show your images or something. So it's really appealing for the end users and for the businesses. And then it's some kind of mobility, but it's internal mobility within the shops, within the subsidiaries, or between shops, because in some cases, some sales guys can switch from one shop to a store to another. And I have been more successful in doing internal mobility with tablets than, like Shawn was talking about, with external mobility.
And the thing with internal mobility to keep in mind that is a big gap today is if you're working on internal mobility projects, whether it's iPads or Android tablets, do not forget about the licensing implications of doing that. And if you're not familiar with how Microsoft licenses the VDA for virtual desktops or the companion device license, please spend about 14 hours reading the EULA and reading all the guides from Microsoft, because at a very, very high level, it works like this. If it's a physical PC that you're remoting, just a physical desktop that you're RDPing into or HDXing into or something like that, you don't really require any additional licensing to do so. If you're doing a terminal services scenario, you can have your RDSCal, which is a perpetual basis. There's no sort of VDA nonsense and that kind of stuff. If this is a virtual desktop infrastructure running on top of a hypervisor, we want to remote a desktop, now things get ugly because you have to have either SA or virtual desktop, depending on what kind of endpoint you're using. If you're using an iPad or an Android, it has to be VDA because it's a non-Windows client. So you have to have a VDA license, which is $100 per device per year. Then on top of that, if it's a personal device that is being used inside the corporate office, you have to have either a separate VDA for that device, because they can use it when they're at home, but they can't use it when they're inside the office. And if it's a corporate-owned device, you have to have yet another VDA for that versus what you'd have for their normal desktop if they had a different tablet using the same desktop. So it gets very, very complex, yes, very expensive. So if you're looking at iPads and Androids in your enterprise environment, whether they're consumer-owned or business-owned, really spend a lot of time analyzing the licensing implications, or do terminal services or physical PC.
Yes. And also, IT is always talking about security, but IT should realize that there is no real way to secure all data. Even if you can prohibit with XenApp or Zen Desktop, cut and paste or something, you won't prevent the user to do a print screen or to try to use an iPhone or any kind of phone with a camera to record something or to take a picture of something. Yeah. So security has to be there, and has to be there where it's needed. For example, I worked for a mobility project with a big bank in France, and the idea was to empower the sales representative to be able to do real-time accounts, consultations, loan documents, creation and printing, even when just at customers' offices, so outside of the bank. So, but what we did is that we just set up a system that make the application aware of if the user was outside or inside. Not just to say we will secure, just to say if the user is outside, the user is vulnerable. It can be assaulted by someone who will try to use the application just to get some money. So we just disable the fund transfer option in the application when they are outside. But we realized that there was no way to prevent anyone that would assault the user to get some information, because we used RSA, we used SSL VPN, client integrity check. But you know, if the user is with a robber that has a gun and that is, let's say, assaulting him, what can he do? He will just say, okay, here is my token, here is my PIN, and you can check what you want. So you can try to do your best, and you should not forget that IT security can be a real necessity for government purpose, for banking, financial purpose, but you need to make it simple so that user won't try to avoid it or to use Dropbox to share confidential documents. They need to just to be able to work. So provide them the right service and consider that you should be as transparent as possible. And it's better, for example, for them to use ShareFile that you can secure than to use Dropbox.
Right.
So.
I think there's two important lessons there. One is you have to have the understanding that data has context, right? There's that confidential data that we shouldn't be securing, and then there's data that really isn't confidential or secure in any way. So people have to start thinking about things more like military networks as sort of like a, this is classified, this is unclassified, and not be so restrictive that, no, you can't share any data, because this might be like a meeting agenda that's not confidential in any way, shape, or form, but the person needs to get it from this device to this device. And I had a customer that was, you know, financial services very heavily investing into all sorts of control solutions and DLP and endpoint encryption and media encryption and all these things. And I needed to get a document off my work machine onto another machine. So I was talking to the InfoSec guys. He's like, yeah, we got to really control this and nobody can get anything, whatever. So I took my Mac, I VPN'd through their VPN, I launched RDP, I connected to my desktop and did the transfer through the virtual channel. And he was like, oh, I guess we need to find some way to stop that too. And I was like, listen, you can't stop this. If you stop this method, I will just find another one, and then another one, and then another one. You will never stay ahead of the users. It was the case 15 years ago that users didn't know what proxies were, or SSL tunneling of content, or any of these things. Today, they all know about it. So you're kidding yourself if you think that putting in blocks or controls or DLP solutions and encryption and all these things is going to stop exfiltration of data. I've been a big proponent of a long time of saying that moving your data to the data center does not make it any more secure, because the threat has changed. The threat used to be a worm, an attacker coming in, these kinds of things. Now the biggest attack is the end user doing something stupid that compromises and exfiltrates the data. And there's nothing about VDI that makes it any more secure than if it was sitting on an endpoint device. Securing data at rest is easy. Securing data in unencrypted form, in other words, Windows is booted and the data is readily available, that's the major risk, and nothing that you're doing is going to stop that being exfiltrated. So centralizing data in the data center does not provide any better security. It provides you more opportunities to be more reactive and more responsive to potential information loss, but it does not make it more secure.
It's probably, excuse me, probably our biggest challenge is the data stuff. We've had, first thing we did, we gave iPads, and they immediately had Dropbox. I mean, before we walked out the door, they had Dropbox and were sharing data.
Yeah.
What we found is we had to give them a solution that would let them share as much data as they needed amongst their devices, but did it in a secure way. And it's like a tightrope walk. If you make it too difficult for them, they're going to find a different way. But you have to make it secure. It's absolutely the hardest thing.
There are some leading solutions right now coming out, both from Citrix and VMware. ShareFile was just announced at Synergy in San Francisco to have an on-premise offering. So now, while the provisioning of user accounts is up in the cloud, the actual data storage is on a server in your environment. It's a Linux appliance that you deploy internally. So your data storage stays inside your network. and the people connect in through SSL to get access to their data, which then lives on the device in an encrypted container. So the solutions like that let you sort of keep the data in the four walls when it's being stored at rest, and when it's being stored at rest on the device, it's secure, versus Dropbox, where you don't have those same levels of comfort because your data is actually in their data center, hosted up on Amazon S3 and these different places, and you don't have any control of that data. And this is particularly important for a lot of European companies that have privacy issues around where the data is actually hosted. So it's very important.
How secure is, say, if you use GoodReader to take a local Cinco, say, a box folder, how secure is it within GoodReader or within even, like, say, the box application?
Well, the problem is once you take that data sort of outside of the sandbox container and you're running it inside of a native application, you still have capabilities in the native application to sort of send that data outside. And Good is doing some new things now to sandbox the individual applications. Citrix is doing the same thing with Cloud Gateway. They're going to be wrapping native applications, not the built-in iOS ones, but third-party ones that they can wrap with controls. So they'll be able to say any storage that's exposed to this native application is part of our sandbox, and therefore we're not going to allow it to escape the sandbox. So there's things coming, but today it's not a very good story.
Yes, and that's a good example because there are things coming, but you have free solutions like Dropbox or just cheap solutions like Dropbox that are providing the service without the security.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, for end users, they got the service, and they don't care about the security. So that's a real proof that we have to do our best to adapt to users' expectations. Otherwise, because they do not care about security, for example, they will use the shortest path to get the service. Yeah. Even if it's not provided by IT, even if it's not secured, they don't care because it's doing the job. And they just want IT applications, services. They just want it to do the job and to be able to work without wondering, where are my datas? Do I have synchronization or something? They just want it. Okay, I need it. I will use it. And even with the Citrix model of wrapping application, you need to wrap native apps. And if they want to use the App Store to get the same app, they still can. So, we need to really talk with them and explain them that there are some security constraints, but that we are working on making it accessible and transparent. And then it's the only way to secure your project.
Okay, so I want to jump into the desktop transformation that Citrix has available. How many people are familiar with this little web tool Citrix has created, Desktop Transformation Accelerator? Okay, so in concept, I think this is a good idea. It's an idea to get people thinking about how do I approach in a methodical manner taking my existing fleet of desktops and looking at how I can fit them into buckets, that I can do virtualized desktops on VDI and terminal services, and how do I do the assessment and all these kinds of things. I think in general, it's way more complicated than what their sort of web-based tool is really exposing, but I think it's a good first start. So I don't think it's a bad idea. What I think is bad about it is they take this approach that it's an all-in type of technology where you should be looking at this for every one of your desktops, and I think Pierre and I both disagree with that. I think we need to apply the appropriate use cases. So anyway, I probably should have put a link up here, but I can, if you just Google Desktop Transformation Accelerator, you guys will find the link to it. So what are the kind of primary things that I think might be challenging about the Desktop Transformation Accelerator? There are 5 primary qualifying priorities that Citrix lets you choose from that first drives the rest of this accelerator. So those qualifying priorities are, you want to reduce cost, you want to increase security, you want to enable virtual work styles, increase agility, and achieve greater device independence. So let's take each of these for a moment. Reduce cost. I'm not saying anything anyone else is not saying. Virtual desktops in any form will increase your CapEx, and this is a Gartner quote, so take it with a grain of salt, between 1.4 to 1.7 times, CapEx alone. Now, OpEx is a side nobody's talking about, and everyone seems to indicate that taking OpEx, because you're moving to virtual desktops, you're going to have this sort of one image that's used in all your machines and one update model and all these kinds of things, that theoretically your operational expense should go down because you're managing one image for all your desktops and this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, that's not reality. it's like 9 images that you're maintaining, or 14 images, or 22 images, and each image update model is being maintained differently. Question? Okay, so let me clarify what I'm talking about. So many clients of mine have one singular image that they deploy that's a base image that then evolves the minute it's deployed. So I OSD a machine, now I push some software with Config Manager. That machine is now completely unique from every other machine in my organization because the permutation and combinations of apps is different. Each desktop has its own DNA. The minute the user logs on and does some things to it, the minute you push software to it, they start becoming unique. So what I'm talking about is if I have some physical PCs that are one OSD image with Config Manager, and then I introduce Zen Desktop, and I do PVS, or I do MCS, that's another image update mechanism that's completely separate from Config Manager, OSD, ESD. Then I introduce Zen Client with Zen Client Synchronizer. I have a different model of deploying the base image and updating the image. Then I decide to put in the personal disk that RingCube technology added, and that's now a separate sort of unique image layering model. So each one of these things has its own sort of deployment and update mechanism that now creates this more complex model than I had in the past where I had one base image with software I pushed. So that's what I'm getting at, that on the OpEx side, when you have all these different desktop diversity models, you have much more complexity on the operational expense side than you had previously where you had one way of doing things. So that will get better, it will evolve, it will eventually be operationally good, but today it's the opposite. And on the CapEx side, like I said, 1.4 to 1.7 times today to deploy virtual desktops versus doing it the traditional way. So, and I was talking specifically server-hosted VDI, not necessarily terminal services and that kind of stuff. So increased security. We've already kind of beaten this to death, but I'm a big proponent that moving your data into the data center does not provide you a higher level of security. It offers you many more opportunities to wrap some more security around it, but just moving it from point A to point B makes it no more secure. That's a complete fallacy. Enabling virtual work styles. Pierre and I both agree this one makes perfect sense. Having ways that people can be both, internally mobile, externally mobile, getting their apps and data from anywhere that they are, this absolutely enables virtual work styles. Increasing business agility. If you're in a position where you can provision your desktops faster, you can deploy apps faster, revoke apps faster, all of these things, everything that's in the FlexCast model and virtual desktops in general does really drive business agility. It makes a lot of sense. And this last one, achieving greater device independence, this one's sort of a mixed bag. It sort of depends on which FlexCast model you choose. If you're talking about terminal services, great amount of device independence. If you're talking VDI, pretty decent device independence. If you're talking about Zen Client and these types of things, that's where the device independence starts to kind of go away. So the model you choose is really going to dictate how flexible or how device independent you are. So when I have conversations with a lot of CIOs and CTOs about what's driving them to move towards desktop virtualization, besides they read about it in CIO Magazine, I try to understand what are the business objectives that are really important to you. Because the reality is I'm going to throw about 10 or 12 of these on the board, and there's not a single desktop virtualization technology that fulfills every one of these needs. So I say, here's a whole bunch of benefits desktop virtualization can provide. You tell me what are important to you, and then we'll craft a solution based around that. So the first one is faster provisioning. How long does it take to slam down an image on top of a machine? And not just the base image, but all the level set ESD, patching, everything else before you hand the desktop to the user. If that's 2 hours now, is that too long? Is it 8 hours? What is your total amount of time? So provisioning time is important. Supporting hot desking, so sort of that internal mobility, moving from one desktop workspace to the other and picking up where you left off. How important is hot desking? Rapid desktop DR. If you have an off-site DR location where you've got 1,000 machines sitting on standby people can walk up to, how quickly can you get those machines to a point where someone can sit down and have their complete work environment? If you're in the fat PC world, this is going to be a big challenge because you're going to end up having to deploy your base image in your DR site and make sure every time you push software to PC A, you're pushing it to PC B so they're completely in sync. This can get ugly very, very quickly. If you're in a VDI or terminal services model, this is a no-brainer. They sit at the dumb client PC, they connect in, and they got the same desktop experience. Effectively managing branch infrastructure. When I say manage, I'm really talking more about reducing the complexity of branch infrastructure. A lot of my clients are working towards how do we collapse the file and print and mail servers and all these things in the branch and make them truly just remote node offices where people have PCs that remote back into the data center for their compute. Sometimes it makes sense for that to be terminal services or VDI, and sometimes it makes sense for that to be some local compute, some remote compute with a WAN accelerator to make the remote compute better. Managing disconnected endpoints. Config Manager keeps getting better and better at this, but the reality today is still it's not a great story to manage a endpoint that's provisioned through OSD, ESD, and keep it up to date on software pushes and these kinds of things. App virtualization can make that a better story, but if you look at some of the solutions like Wanova and Mocha 5 and these guys, they've got a much better image lifecycle update process for disconnected endpoints than anything that we can do with either a push or pull style technology that installs software. Allowing users to repair themselves either on an application level or a whole system level. So this is not like, can they run system restore and revert their whole machine, but if they have an individual application problem, are you providing self-service tools that lets them say, reset this app to known defaults and let me keep working? So again, if you're using app virtualization in your environment, AppVirt, with all the products, has the ability to sort of remove the customizations the user made and return it back to a functional state. So this is a good use case for that. Supporting OS migrations, making it easier to go from XP to Win 7 and ultimately Win 7 to Win 8. So AppVirt tools help you with this. User virtualization tools like AppSense and Res and all these guys Sense will help you make that transition easier. Reducing cost to manage your applications. Most organizations I work with, they typically have a 4 to 6 week life cycle for the certification process of analyzing an application, any conflicts, packaging it, deploying it, regression testing, retiring. That whole life cycle is about 4 to 6 weeks for most customers. Now, app virtualization can drive that amount down to a smaller number, but the key thing is most people, what they fail at is keeping good track of their applications. Tracking your applications is as important as certifying and packaging them and making sure you don't have conflicts. Stretching lifecycle. And this is a bit of a pain point for me because I'm not a big fan of thin client devices as a whole, because they were sold on the premise that it's the last PC you're ever going to buy. It's going to be 10, 15-year lifetime. That just simply isn't true. And even with the newer generation devices, it's not true. And why is it not true? Because we didn't keep doing the same things we did 15 years ago. We're not still running terminal emulators as the only application we use. We moved to a more graphically complex environment, and that's going to continue. So even when thin clients come out today that can do some 3D capabilities and they've got the onboard GPU and that kind of stuff, what happens when it becomes Minority Report and we've got some display that we're touching, virtual reality and moving things around the screen? Is the thin client going to do that? Of course not. It's not designed for that experience because the experience hasn't been created yet. So that's, just make sure that you understand the capabilities of the device as to whether or not it's really going to provide you longer life cycle. In general, though, thin clients will give you probably 5 to 7 years versus a typical PC on the 3 to 4 year scale. But another option, of course, is if you're not worried about the hardware failing, but you're just worried about the management of the OS, then do thin PC. Lock it down, deliver a thin managed Windows OS instance, and then you get a great user experience. You don't have to deal with the complexities of the VDA licensing scheme. And if the hardware fails, rip it out and replace it with another crappy old PC and put thin PC back on it. Shortening your downtime. If somebody does have a problem, how rapidly can they repair themselves and how rapidly can IT repair them and get them back to a functional desktop? If you're using something like PVS and they've done something to sort of damage their image, when the image gets rebooted, they're going to go back to a pristine state. This is a very, very powerful thing versus, well, wait while we re-image your system for the next 2 hours. Supporting work from home initiatives. I talked about the pandemic scenario, letting people work anywhere in the world. Being hardware agnostic, and this one's difficult because it depends on which FlexCast model you choose. But generally speaking, we want to begin to move ourselves to a situation where we don't have to worry what endpoint the person has. And I'm not talking about iPad, Android. I'm just saying if they go to their local retailer and buy some off-the-shelf PC for $200, are they going to get a great user experience with what we have to deliver them today? And then enabling rapid onboarding for mergers and acquisitions. I deal with this a lot with my clients. We'll buy a company, and traditionally this takes 6 to 8 months to bring the people into your environment. Well, this is one place where I think virtual desktops, both XenApp and VDI, has been a huge, huge help. Because now we don't have to worry about taking their existing PCs that could be Dell when we're HP or something like that, and how do we prep our image for their machines, whatever. No, just slurp their desktops their new brand desktops that we're creating in the data center, let them use whatever they have right now and just remote into it. It's brilliant. It really makes this a lot easier. And then supporting some heavyweight CPU and GPU-based applications. I've got a number of clients in financial services that have application footprints that are around 1 to 2 gigabytes per user of RAM for one application instance. And there was a gentleman in my Paris training class that absolutely takes the cake. He has one app that takes 20 gigabytes of memory per user on XenApp. And I was like, wow. So you start thinking about these delivery models and what happens when someone has one of these apps that takes 20 gigabytes of memory. Are you going to host that in VDI? Are you going to host it in XenApp? Or are you going to try to find other means to deploy that? So flip over to Pierre.
Yes, what's interesting is that in some cases, IT expectations are coming from users' expectations. So rapid onboarding, for example. A customer of mine switched to our cloud service, not because he wanted to go to cloud, but because when they were deploying a new shop, they had to wait for 8 weeks to get the computers. And in 2 weeks, the shops were ready. So IT was not allowing the shops to start when they were ready. So that's why they switched to a cloud service provider, because of the reactivity. And I think the users, they want just to have a transparent service. That's a good summary. They want easy access to their applications, their data. They just want, just like all of you on your tablet or iPad or something, slide to unlock, click, it's working. And that's also the experience that the tablet is pushing. I have recently bought a new computer with SSD. I will never go to a standard hard drive again. Say, we get used to the quality of the service, to the performances. If you try SSD, you will always want SSD for your main OS partition, because it's so fast, it's so reactive, and you don't feel like you click on the icon, you have to wait for seconds or minutes for the application to launch. Users just want to do their job, and they don't want to. Maybe it could be useful if you have a 5 minutes time login. You can say, oh, I have to wait 5 minutes, I will take a coffee, and after the coffee break, the computer will be ready. And how many of you have seen such user behavior? Okay, it's long to start, then go take a coffee, and the coffee break won't last 5 minutes. But at the end of the day, for the companies, it's a real money loss every day, for example. They want instant response time. When you are in front of a customer, he is asking you something, you want to give the answer. You don't want to wait or just to say, oh, I will call you when I will be back at the office. Why? Because if you do this, you are adding more chance to lose the customer. Because when you are, for example, when you are buying a car, you don't want, you are negotiating, don't want to say, what's your best price? Come to see me tomorrow, I will give you my best price. That's the same kind of things. The users, the IT users want to have the information when they need it. So they don't want to wait. And actually, is my computer virtual, physical, on the type 1 hypervisor? Are my application virtualized or not? As an end user, I do not care. That's IT problem. I just want my shortcut or my link, launch my application. With single sign-on, it would be perfect, because otherwise I will put a post-it on my desktop or under the keyboard. That's the real use cases. And then I just want it to work. And that's what I am saying when I'm talking with users. They notice everything. Some users told me some weeks ago, my virtual desktop, it's better when we are on holidays, because there are less people in the company. So yes, there was a load issue, but they notice everything, and they also notice when the service is bad, because it's also useful to say, I've not done all my job, but that's because the service was bad. Every consultant, I think, has had to deal with users saying the service is so bad, I was not able to do my job. And that's also the main complaint of users. And also, they want to work where and when they want. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but in France, we have more and more need for flexibility. For example, with men or women that want to take care of their children. They just want to be able to leave the office earlier, but then to be able to continue the work at evening or night, for example. And behavior in the companies are changing. In France, we have a specific status for executive, which means we are not working 8 hours a day or something. We are just working on a mission-based scenario, which means we can manage our time just like we want. And as long as the job is done, we just can do it. So that's also pushing for a more flexible way of work. And that's really what users want. They just want IT to follow them, actually.
That's true. We've got about 10 minutes less, so I think I'm going to speed up.
Yes.
Sorry. So one quick thing I want to talk about is, does one size fit all? When you have hats, absolutely. You just adjust a little band in the back, and then it fits everybody. However, other times it's good to have a different size for a different purpose, and that's what we're really talking about with use cases. Sometimes having a larger device might be more helpful, as in the case of this poor car that got destroyed by the truck. Sometimes these things are necessary. And I love this picture. This is one that Pierre came up with. Some applications are not suitable for tablets. And I don't know if you can really see it, but Superman has like poked his finger through the tablet trying to click on something. So we talked a little bit about FlexCast, which is, this is a bit of an old picture, but Citrix has 85,000 million different ways to deliver a desktop, and it's sort of up to us to figure out which one of the buckets we drop our users into. And I think it's good that we have these opportunities to choose different desktop delivery models, but it also ends up being quite complex because what Citrix doesn't tell you is that every one of these FlexCast models has its own unique image provisioning process and image update process. So if you deploy every option in FlexCast, you're going to have like 7 different image update models that you have to deal with. And every one of them does things differently. So again, going back to the operational expense, very, very high operational expense cost. The one good thing they do have in the Desktop Transformation Accelerator is a guidance document around FlexCast, which I think is really nice.
Yes, it's really nice because it allows you to pick some users' requirements and to match the model Citrix do have. However, even if it's a good start, it's still from a technical point of view, and also it's never talking about FAT because everything has to go virtual. And we both agree with Shawn that there are some cases where the FAT physical desktop is the solution.
Right.
So you may have a physical desktop with virtualized or published applications or anything like this, but you will need the FAT desktop.
But what's nice about this document is it's the one document out there. We've got the link on there. I'm realizing now that brown on orange was probably not the smartest color choice, so I apologize for that in the back of the room. And this is a bit of an eye chart, but the important thing about this is that you can go to the document and read it offline. But if you have something where you need to use voice over IP, they sort of tell you which of the models will fulfill voice over IP. Now, you got to take this with a grain of salt because just because you can use voice over IP doesn't mean it's a good voice over IP. So there probably needs to be further detail that you need to conduct your own analysis to say which one of these is using the UDP audio transport and all these kinds of things because it's different depending on which product that you use. So what we really want to get to now is sort of talk about use cases. And this is kind of what Pierre and I said. If you think about desktop transformation where they take this idea of analyzing all of your desktops and put them into these buckets, we kind of say don't take this approach of taking every one of your desktops and trying to figure out which bucket it fits into. Take a use case of your user population and figure out what it maps to and do them use case by use case. Don't say we're going to virtualize desktops for our entire company and we're going to succeed at this because chances are you aren't. What you need to do is take a use case of a population and try to fit it into a model that's going to make sense for them.
So first you need to assess your environment.
Yes. So the first thing we say is stop, assess your environment. Or stop, US, do this first. And the assessment, there's tools available to make this easier. So if you guys are familiar with Liquidware Labs Stratosphere, and there's an OEM flavor of that Quest has released, and the Quest is a free tool that you can use for small-scale assessments. Also, Citrix has done an OEM agreement with Lakeside Software, and their software is a part of Desktop Transformation Accelerator. And these are not something you necessarily will run on every one of your desktops. But if you have a use case where you've got 500 people that fall into this bucket, run the assessment on 50 PCs that is representative of what kind of everybody does. And what these tools will do is tell you what applications are installed on the desktops. And you may already have this in Config Manager, but this might be an easier way to do a quick assessment of those specific desktops. And it will also tell you things like, what is the performance profile of this user? Are they heavy RAM, heavy CPU? Is there a lot of networking traffic? Is there a heavy graphical richness of what they do? That will help you understand how they fall into the different buckets.
Yes, and that's really important because we have spent lots and lots of time of trying to bring you something like a matrix, just like the FlexCast model, but more suited to users. And we just came to the conclusion that it depends on your customers, because something that will be true for a customer won't be for another one. You have retail customer, for example. Most users are the same. They are sales guys in shops, stores, and that's quite easy. But for more complex customers like insurance, bank, finance, or government, it's not that easy. So there is no real model, just guidance. So you really need to assess, to understand how your environment is and to understand it. And then you will be able to match all your users' populations.
And so in these two models that we've drawn up here, and these were just something we kind of threw out there on the top of our head based on what we see in a lot of customer environments, we have sort of the two simplest use cases that you'll approach when you go after a desktop virtualization project, the task worker and the knowledge worker. And inside of each of these, they sort of break down into two primary different categories, but you may have more depending on your environment. We think of them as having a set of standard users that are task workers or knowledge workers, and then we have what we call unique and what we call experts. And how we break this out is a standard worker in the task worker side is going to be things like office, productivity applications, and that's pretty much all that they do. And you may have 1,000 people in your organization that fit into this standard bucket, and those will be easy people to address with desktop virtualization. But there are these unique ones, and the unique ones might not be that they use they are heavier uses of the application. It could be they have a unique application requirement, such as the person's visually impaired, and they need JAWS to read the text on the screen. Now, you take a user that requires JAWS and try to stuff them into one of these virtual desktop solutions, good luck with that, because the software doesn't work with a lot of the delivery models for FlexCast. So that's why we say you have to have a unique category to split those people off. And maybe it's that they're going to go to physical PC, or maybe they're going to use some other kind of model. But you have to understand there's going to be a bucket for the 90–95% of the task workers, and then there's going to be that unique bucket that you fit the other people into. And on the knowledge worker side, we think that there's profiles of knowledge workers that might be a more diverse, rich set of applications, and there's going to be a bucket of standard users that's going to fulfill maybe 50–70% of your knowledge workers, and then there's going to be what we call experts. And the experts are the people that are, the financial traders, the people that are doing statistical analysis of information, where their resource profile is going to be so off the charts in terms of RAM, CPU requirements, whatever, that trying to fit them into the same bucket as the other rich knowledge workers is just not going to work. So you might have to make differing choices just based on their resource profile alone.
It can also be IT guys, developers, or something, people that have specific applications, rights, and like Shawn said, resource profile.
So there's sort of 4 categories that we'll do assessments based on how we put people into buckets. One of them is application mix. So what is the application diversity? What unique application requirements do they have? Are there applications that only work in a certain model like JAWS or something like that? Then what is the performance or resource profile of the user? Do they require a 64-bit with 16 gig of RAM or 32 gig of RAM? The next one would be, what is the device that this person needs to use? Do they have to have a local compute model to be able to work offline and on an airplane and these kinds of things? And then the last one is specifically around mobility, both for internal mobility and external mobility. So do they need iPad? Do they need these different types of...
Yes, hot desking and roaming from desktop to desktop.
Right. So we're running out of time here, but let's try to get through this really quick. So let's do a quick summary. You want to take this one?
So first, just understand your environment. Understand your customer environment or your own environment if you are working for an end customer. And try to assess it with the appropriate software or tools. If you have SCCM or things like that, it may be easier to assess your environment.
And like I said, don't forget about the free stuff, both from Citrix and Quest. Sign up, get the free trial, you can implement it in your environment, do your assessment, and that will help you output some usable information.
Yes. Then, try to design something also for IT, just not only for users, that is easier to deploy and maintain. And never forget that you can design the most technical, advanced environment, but it can be a mess to manage, even with FlexCast. That is supposed to be a unique way of managing your virtual desktops. And for example, if an application is updated every week, it may not be a good AV candidate. And try to focus on users' work styles and also on users' experience. And really, just try it. Just spend the day in users' shoes and just try to talk with them and to grab their expectations of the new desktop and to really know what they do want and what they do expect from IT to provide as a service. And that's the only way your project will be successful. Also, you have to bring value to business. Sometimes it's just as easy as including single sign-on in your virtual or next generation desktop project. Why? Because you are saying that's why IT will give you, and it's not that's what IT decided for you. That's a completely new story. That's we have spent times with you, and we want to bring you value. And that's also a way to have a better relationship between business and IT.
Okay, so really quickly, I already talked to you guys about myself, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. I do consulting, I do independent training, and speaking at events. So you can find my website, shawnbass.com. I don't update it nearly as often as I should, but feel free to email me questions if you have, or send me direct messages on Twitter.
Yes, and very quickly, I have been developing tools for years, and I started my own company providing a very pragmatic UEM solution. So it's called VUEM. Basically, it's just simple and really fast for end users, providing self-service options, just like this presentation, I would say, in a pragmatic way. So if you want to give it a try, just send us an email, and it would be a pleasure to present you the solution.
So I know we really don't have time for questions because I think we're already like 2 minutes over, but Pierre and I will be around at the back of the room if you guys have any questions. Do you need